Again, we want to thank you all for coming to our fourth annual School of Management Business Conference. I'm Anthony Arizmendi with the EMBA Steering Committee team. And now I'm going to introduce you to the Dean of our Honors College, Katia Passerini, who's going to introduce us to our next speaker and the next panel subject. Applause, please.
Good afternoon again. I am really pleased to introduce the next and last speaker, our closing keynote, because he has been connected to the Honors College for the last 14 years. And as of last Friday, he has also been elected as the co-vice chair of our Board of Visitors. So we're really pleased to have him here to represent the Honors College, to represent NJIT in an incredible way. Let me tell you a little bit about his background that you'll find in the program, and you'll know why we're so thrilled to have him here. Mike Smith is Vice President for Revenue Platforms and Operations at Hearst Magazine Digital Media and General Manager of Core Audience. He joined Hearst in July 2013, and before then, he was at Forbes for a long time. Michael is known not only for his technical expertise and his leadership within his industry, but also to NJIT as one of the well-known and loved employer of many of our students. I have met a lot of students that do internship or are hired by Forbes and hopefully now also Hearst, and they really have an incredible experience. So let me tell you about what he did at Forbes. He was the Chief Digital Officer of Forbes Media, and he oversaw the company's technology departments, including IT systems, multi-platform development, and digital strategy. He was also responsible for audience sales via actions, including trading desks, advertising operations, data and analytics, and yield management. We've talked all day about data and data management, and he's our perfect closing speaker for this. Before Forbes, he was Chief Technology Officer and Vice President and Chief Information Officer at TheStreet.com, where he directed technology efforts, including application development, network engineering, website operation, global technology initiatives, and business support systems. And prior to that, he was Director of Information Technology at HBO. So if you remember, before we talked about the merging on marketing and technology, and I think he is a true example of that. He holds a network technology-related patent and is the author of a new book, Targeted: How Technology is Revolutionizing Advertising and the Way Companies Reach Consumer. That was just published in 2014 by Amacom. He graduated from NJIT with a BS in electrical engineering. As I mentioned before, he's been a member of the Albert Dorman's Honors College Board of Visitors for 14 years. But he's also been chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Education Law Center, a member of the School Consultative Board of Union Catholic High School, and a member of the Union League Club. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Michael and thank him for being here today.
Thank you, Katia. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be at NJIT speaking with you, and I hope we'll both learn something from my talk today about digital advertising. So as Katia said, I am a graduate of NJIT with a degree in electrical engineering. I started at NJIT as a day student and concluded after a period of years as a night student. My dad got tired of paying for the same classes over and over again. So he said, go to work and pay the rest of the way yourself. My dad graduated from NJIT when it was called Newark College of Engineering. He graduated with an industrial engineering degree. So, gosh, I'm really, really excited to chat with you. So here's what I focus on every day. I focus on digital advertising. What is digital advertising? Well, they're the ads you see when you do a search on Google. They're the ads you see when you go to the NewYorkTimes.com and see banners. Rumor has it no one pays attention to them. that the banner's dying. The banner's 20 years old. It's been dying for 10. And then last, when you go to Facebook or Twitter, so social media, and I'll speak with you this afternoon about those three paradigms: search, display, and social, because those are the three major categories of digital media. And I'll also speak with you about a few of the paradigm-shifting innovations that great inventors created in digital advertising that have really, I'll try to persuade you, changed advertising forever. Because prior to digital media, digital advertising, print advertising in newspapers, in magazines, on television, the 30-second spots that we see, television advertising is the biggest segment of advertising by a lot. And I'll give you some context. I'll share with you a few statistics that I think will help frame the discussion. But the non-digital forms of advertising are very difficult to measure in terms of the effectiveness. When you spend $1, did you make more than $1 back in value? Did you sell more than $1 worth of products from that advertising? Or did you make your brand famous in a way that later sells more than $1 worth of advertising? That kind of attribution modeling, econometrics, is hard to do in non-digital media. And it's actually not easy to do in digital media either. But it's far more doable. And again, I'll share with you a few of the innovations and the innovators behind those innovations that will hopefully inspire you and provide some interesting information about the industry that I work in. Now, I've worked in this industry for 15 years. Before that, I was, strictly speaking, a tech person. But I entered the dot-com business before the dot-com bubble popped in 2001. I entered in '99. And so I've seen a lot in the 15 years that I've been in digital media. All right? The last 4 years, while I worked at Forbes, and then more recently, for the last year and a half, at Hearst Corporation, both are publishers. Hearst is the publisher of magazine titles that you're familiar with: Cosmopolitan, Elle, Esquire, Car and Driver, Road and Track. They also own giant newspapers in cities like San Francisco and Houston and elsewhere. Hearst also owns 31 local broadcast television stations. So the biggest TV station in Boston and Baltimore and Orlando, these are owned by Hearst Corporation. I work at Hearst. I work on their their digital advertising technology initiatives. And it gives me the opportunity to see from the inside some of the fascinating innovations that are happening that I'll share with you now. I also got to work on the book that Katya mentioned. I thought, gosh, this is so fascinating to me. Why not research and chronicle these innovations that have happened in this book that was just released 2 weeks ago called Targeted. So it's available on Amazon. It's available in the Apple bookstore. It's available in the Barnes & Noble stores. You can pretty much access it any way you'd purchase a book. So I'll share with you some of my work at Hearst and a lot of the research we did in the book. We interviewed for, over the course of 4 years, 400 ad tech executives. And ad tech executives that live on the buy side of media, on the sell side of media, folks who live in the middle. And we'll get into that now. So, how technology is revolutionizing advertising the way companies now reach consumers. So what happened in paid search, and I'll offer you the statistics now. Digital advertising in the United States, all the stats I'm going to give you now will be US statistics. In 2013, the ads that you see on Google search results, which you would also see on Yahoo search results or MSN search results or Ask.com search results, paid search results, that was a $20 billion industry in the US in 2013. It'll probably be a $22, $23 billion business when we close this year. That's paid search. All paid search advertising is sold in an auction. So from the inception of paid search advertising, it's always been sold technologically, essentially by robots, not by salespeople. So all the search queries that occur on Google and the other search engines, if you counted them up, that number would be huge. In a month's time, let's call it 20 billion searches a month. That is Google and Yahoo's inventory to sell when you do a search. And they're auctioning it, not terribly differently than eBay auctions products that we buy or sell. The difference is it happens much faster. So a car company like Jaguar may run a paid search campaign. They buy their own brand, Jaguar, because if they don't buy their own brand, other bidders will buy the search for Jaguar, because you can imagine Mercedes-Benz would love to show up on a search query for someone who's researching Jaguar. So it's a very competitive bidding landscape. And all the media is sold robotically. It's bought robotically and it's sold robotically in an auction. So we'll skip display for a minute. We'll skip display advertising and we'll jump to social. Social advertising, when you go on Facebook and you see the ads that increasingly appear in your news feed and to the right side, those are all sold at auction. And in many ways, the format of the ad is similar to paid search, a lot of text and a lot of and links. Paid links, they're often called, in search anyway. But they're also not dissimilar from display advertising, which is sometimes called banner advertising, the kind of ads you see on the New York Times or any of the Hearst sites, in that they're graphically richer than the paid search. So anyway, in social, which is dominated by Facebook today, all of the advertising is sold in an auction system. Okay, when you go to Facebook on your mobile device or on a desktop or laptop or iPad and you render a page, right? You go to Facebook and you look at your news feed. An auction's taking place where bidders are buying your attention. Okay? Now, we'll talk about display. When does the auction occur? And this, I think, is the most important innovation in advertising, period. And it's happening in display advertising, which for the last 20 years has largely been sold by salespeople in the same way that magazine and newspaper advertising is sold. Okay, it's bought and sold by people, negotiated contracts over meetings, schedules set way in advance, ad creative assets provided in advance of the campaign flight, sponsorship oriented. But increasingly that middle category, which in 2013 was an $18 billion business in the United States, and at the end of 2014 will probably be equal in size to paid search. That middle category is, one, becoming robotically bought and sold. So increasingly that media is no longer being transacted by people. It's being transacted in auctions by technology, robotically. And two, and importantly, and the big spectacular innovation that I'll share with you today, which is called real-time bidding, as you, the consumer, are waiting for that New York Times page to load, which would probably take on a typical website about 1 second. So as you get up in the morning and you fire up your iPad and you go to the New York Times page or whichever page you visit, as you're waiting for that page to load, in that 1 second, if you can just tear that second apart and look within it, in about 200 milliseconds, hundreds of companies in that moment, while you're waiting for the page to load, their computers bid for the opportunity to put the ad in front of you. And that's called real-time bidding. So what's happened is the area of digital media that's been the least technologically advanced in terms of how media is transacted is quickly becoming instead the most technologically advanced. Because in paid search and social, which have always been auction-driven, the bidding for your attention happens before you ever go to the Facebook page or do the Google search query. Those bids by Jaguar, they're submitted days, weeks, months in advance. The valuation of the keyword Jaguar is inserted into the computer in advance of you, the consumer, ever querying Google. Okay? So it's not, technically speaking, a real-time auction. Display, however, banner advertising, is quite literally a real-time auction because it's not until you, the consumer, fetch the page, request the page, query the New York Times for an article, that in that moment, while you're waiting for the page to load, the actual auction is conducted and bids are submitted within that moment. And the reason that's important, and it'll begin to affect other media, including, if you can imagine, an electronic billboard on the side of a highway. As your car drives by the turnpike billboard that is digital, it is conceivable that people will bid, advertisers, technology companies on behalf of advertisers, will know that you're driving by, know the occupants in the car, and place value on your attention as you drive by at that moment on a Friday afternoon, which has different value based on advertisers. You can imagine that if your family's considering their next vacation, you have higher value to airlines, hotels in that moment versus other services. And your value changes by time of day and geography and demographics and psychographics. And the data behind the bidders' systems is really a fast-growing business. The companies, I'm sure you're familiar with the now often used phrase big data. Companies like Hearst increasingly hire statisticians. And the folks that have backgrounds in mathematics and the sciences who are hired by media companies and advertising technology companies and advertising agencies and advertisers who want to collect data about consumers. Because when we use the internet, make no mistake, we are very tracked, right? Every click is recorded by dozens, if not hundreds of companies. And it's archived in a database. And when you clear your cookie, I can assure you from a lot of research that is a very false sense of anonymizing yourself. Companies are expert at reconnecting with you. The cookie is just one way to tether to you. And there's a whole chapter on where we speak to privacy and the implications of these technologies on us as a society. But the book outlines a great deal of what we're talking about. And I think that, gosh, when I reflect back on being an electrical engineering student, there wasn't a computer engineering curriculum when I was here, so I concentrated my course of study on computers. It's a wonderful opportunity, media, for NJIT students to consider, because media companies, advertising, is becoming as scientific as it has always been creative. It's no less creative, but it's certainly far more scientific. So I will share with you a few slides of some of the pioneers behind the innovations that I just took you through, but I would love questions. So, attention economy, behavioral economics, big field of study, attention economics, a growing field of study, an emerging field of study, and really If you study real-time bidding and digital advertising in the ways that I've just described to you, it's fundamentally at root an attention economy course of interest. Okay, this gentleman, Bill Gross. If you're ever wondering who invented paid search, well, it's my opinion that he did. Bill is the founder of an incubator for startups called Idea Labs in Pasadena, California. And it was Bill who got the idea that, gosh, motivated by trying to eliminate spam on search engines. Because if you go back 20 years, in the mid-90s, and you did a search, you mostly got back not what you were hoping for. So Bill wanted to eliminate spam, so he came up with the idea for an auction model for selling and serving paid search advertising. I think Bill changed advertising forever. He hired Ted Mizell, who I got to work for 3 years while I worked at Forbes. And Ted became the CEO of a company called Overture, which during its time in the late 90s and early 2000s dominated paid search. Google didn't exist when they started. Google then built a better mousetrap and out-Googled them. But Ted is a brilliant paid search pioneer and really brought Bill's idea to life and created a billion-dollar enterprise, which then got acquired by Yahoo. We've spoken about real-time bidding. So Mike Walrath is the person who got the idea to create real-time bidding. He worked at a company called DoubleClick, which in digital advertising may be the most important company that's ever existed. There are many. DoubleClick's really important. It was purchased by Google. Most publishers in the United States anyway, serve all their advertising using DoubleClick software. Anyway, Mike worked there. He was a top salesperson, and he became frustrated with the manual process of buying and selling and optimizing ads to make sure they're more targeted and relevant to the consumers they reach. So Mike eventually left DoubleClick to create his own company called Bright Media, which ended up inventing real-time bidding. Mike sold his company. Brian O'Kelly here was his chief technology officer, so they were partners in making all of that happen. And they sold Bright Media in 2007 to Yahoo for $700 million. Brian is now the CEO of another wonderful ad tech company doing amazing work called AppNexus. AppNexus is a company that I would recommend my son consider working for when he graduates college in a few years. It's an amazing company, and Brian is an amazing innovator. So gosh, does anyone have questions? This gentleman had a question? Thank you.
I was just curious. This is uncomfortable. I was just curious as to how you're quantifying the attention each banner gets per web page. Because I know for a fact that when I look at a web page, I glance over everything. So I'm curious as if there's this person spent X amount of time on this banner, X amount of time on this, and X amount of time on that one.
So if I interpret the question correctly, how do you empirically measure the value of the ad to that consumer? Or if there even was value, if they glanced over it in a way that made no impression whatsoever. And impression's the right word, because all these ads are in digital called ad impressions. So when you sell advertising in digital, if you sell American Express 20 million ads, it's actually referred to in the industry as 20 million impressions. It's complicated. I don't have a simple answer for that. There are so many companies that meter that sort of thing. They'll meter, for example, whether you had the opportunity to see an ad or not. What I mean by that is a typical web page is longer than a typical computer screen. So we all scroll down, okay? But we don't always scroll down. Have you ever wondered what happens with regard to the advertising that's down there below the fold, as it's called, in the industry? I guess in the newspaper business, because newspapers were folded and stacked and you bought them that way, there was the concept of above the fold and below the fold. And above the fold in digital media not only means the top of the page, but it implies more value because it's more likely to be seen because it's at the top. You don't have to scroll down to get there. So there's a phenomena in digital advertising, specifically in display advertising, called viewability. Because for the last 20 years that banner advertising has been sold, right? This nearly $20 billion a year market in the United States. Some giant number of those impressions were never presented to the user in a screen space that can be seen. Yet the advertiser always paid for that. So imagine this. You go to the New York Times, you're reading a story, there's a banner here, the bottom of your screen is here, there's also a banner here. So you read all the way through the story, and therefore you had the opportunity, we don't know that you did, but you had the opportunity to see both. Okay? That would be called two viewed impressions, two viewable impressions. If this gentleman only ever read the first paragraph and never scrolled down, then the first ad was in view, and the second ad was never for you in view because you never scrolled down. Yet the ad was actually served when the page was served to your browser. So for the past 20 years, advertisers paid for 4 impressions in my example. Going forward, due to viewability, they'll only pay for 3. Now, how can they be certain, more to the question you asked, that either of you even engaged in any way, even a moment of thought, in the 2 that you had an opportunity to see and the 1 that you had an opportunity to see? There are all sorts of companies in business, lots of startups, that their mission is to meter activity. One example is that there's a lot of research that the way you move your mouse is akin to the way you move your finger on a printed page. And so based on where your cursor goes, following your mouse movement, there's speculation about this many people were close to the ad and therefore engaged, saw it, and this many people didn't. Heat maps are what are used to meter impressions. Now, you and I could chat for an hour on this topic, easily. But paid search, that $20 billion 2013 Google-dominated business, is bought and sold using computers, and the advertiser only pays when the ad is clicked on. It's called CPC, cost per click advertising. All right, so Jaguar pays not when you do a search result and the Jag ad appears. They don't pay for that. They pay when you click on it. Okay, maybe they pay $5 per click, or $1, or 50 cents, or $10. The price of keywords is highly variable and it changes over time. You can imagine as we enter the holidays, commerce-oriented keyword price goes way up. In display media, the advertiser pays when the impression's served. No click required. However, everything's measured in digital. So if American Express is paying for a lot of impressions, they just paid for 4 impressions, only 3 of them had a chance of being seen, and let's say only 1 actually was, right? If we serve that ad to 1 million people like you, and only 5 of the million click on them, i.e. there's a low click-through rate, American Express will cancel the plan. Because they'll infer from the low click-through rate that there was low engagement with their advertising and that it's therefore not working.
I had a slightly different question.
Yes?
You had I don't know if you can, I don't know if this is on. You had a slide a couple back that showed kind of a workflow on
Yes?
how the ads are served. I was curious about, who runs the auction system? Is that New York Times auctions them, or does this go to some sort of a brokerage house that auctions them, or how does that work?
Right. That's a fantastic question, too. So the question is, who runs the auction system? So who is the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ of digital advertising? And the answer is, well, Google owns one, and it's called AdX. Cap A, small d, cap X, AdX. DoubleClick, which dominated publisher ad serving, was then working on building an exchange. And it was for that reason that Google acquired them. Google wanted a display advertising exchange so that they could begin to become a big force, not just in paid search, but also in display advertising. So Google runs a big one. Yahoo runs a big one. It's called Right Media, which is the company that Mike Walrath founded. There are more than a dozen exchanges. Google is, in the United States, the big one. And the complexity on the internet, if you're familiar with the business phrase co-opetition, a lot of the people you do business with, a lot of the people that you cooperate with, are also your competition. So if you take Google as the perfect example, Google powers an exchange that, like the NASDAQ, is meant to bring buyers and sellers together, and then Google clears the transaction. Okay?
So Google does the arbitrage, or is there like a
It's-
stock?
It's a per transaction fee on the seller. Okay? So if Hearst and the New York Times and Forbes and the WallStreetJournal.com make their ad impression inventory available to the Google AdX exchange, which they all do, then all the ad tech companies that are bidding on behalf of the advertisers, they're actually bidding on behalf of the ad agencies that were hired by the advertisers. Google is the clearinghouse for the transactions. However, Google also goes straight to advertisers and sells programs. So they take a principal interest. It's the difference between being a principal or an agent in the transaction. An ad agency is an agent because they're hired by an advertiser to manage the advertiser's ad budget, and then the agency takes a percent fee for managing the budget, right? So the ad agency is the agent, and a principal would have their money at risk, which is not the case in agencies, but it's certainly the case for the buyer and the seller, the advertiser and the publisher. Google not only functions as an exchange, but they also function as a seller of media. So they take a position in the media, meaning they take risk, and they sell it directly to an advertiser. So they're not an unbiased operator of the exchange like the NASDAQ is. I mean, to illustrate with the financial stock equities markets model, it would be as if NASDAQ bought positions of General Motors and sold them to Morgan Stanley. And that doesn't happen. In digital media, it happens. And it's not unique to Google either. A lot of co-opetition.
I have a question. We're focusing on the digital, but
Yes.
at the same time, what's happening to print media and print advertising? Do you see a substitution effect, or are those run completely separately? And is there a future for print advertising?
Well, I'll work backwards. There's definitely a future for print advertising. I work at a company within a company. I work for Hearst Magazine's digital media. And the magazine business is a much larger business. The print business is a much larger business than the digital business. If you juxtapose the two, the difference is in the growth rate. So what is the growth rate of the print advertising business year over year, and what is the growth rate of digital? They're materially different. Digital's growing like this. The challenge for digital for traditional publishers is that Google and Facebook so dominate digital advertising that a lot of the growth in the ad spend, so if there were ad budgets that were going to television commercials, going to print advertising, some portion of that is being rebudgeted toward digital. Are the traditional publishers winning all that additive digital budget? No. They're winning a lot of it, but so are Google and Facebook. The platform companies, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, those companies truly represent the competitive dynamic for the traditional publishers that I mentioned and many others that I had.
Any final question?
So, I was just kind of wondering. So, does mobile app development or like app development in general like have a place in advertising, or
Yes.
like as executions for it? I don't know because like it was a lot about banner ads. So I was kind of like
I missed the
that.
last word. A lot about.
Because you focus a lot on banner ads and like advertising for like in terms of like auctioning that. So what about like executions for like say like mobile devices or like things that are I would consider more useful than just looking at an advertisement, I guess. I don't know.
I do want to make sure I understand the question correctly, and I think I heard most of your question.
Yeah.
So mobile apps that we use on our iPhones and Android devices is what you're mainly referring to. Is that right?
Kind of like instead of thinking about it as like. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Instead of like thinking about it like where it's just like, say, like a banner ad, like maybe like something that's disguised as like maybe something that people would use on a daily basis. Like, I don't know. Now when I'm thinking about the question, it's like a yes or no question.
No, based on your last remark, I think I understand
Yeah.
your full question. And if I answer it in a way that proves I don't, correct me. A lot of advertisers now, so we all have smartphones now. Smartphone market and the iPad market are, right? So a lot of brands, and by brands I mean advertisers, Jaguar, American Express, countless others, all the advertisers that want our attention. Part of their marketing strategy now, what they're doing, is they're building apps. So they're not just running, to your point, banner ads in other people's apps. They're also doing that, but they're trying to build a direct relationship with their consumers. And that might include for a hotel chain. So one example that affects me personally would be the Starwood app. And it's a way for Starwood to keep me informed, to continue to reinforce the power of their brand and their offers, because there's brand marketing and then there's also direct response marketing, which is meant typically to book a room, to sell a service in the moment, execute the transaction. So apps are used as a way to advertise and as a customer relationship management medium. And there are many, many examples of that. My Starwood examples, but one. Is that close to answering your question or not really? Okay. But it's a great question, and it's a very real phenomenon.
Any other questions? let's give, absolutely.
Okay, I'm from the library, and I see pay-per-click moving into a lot of other realms. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I do. If you look at the way digital advertising is purchased, you can almost break it into 4 categories, okay? So, and if you looked at it in those 4 categories as a spectrum, it's essentially a risk spectrum, okay? So if you're the buyer, you're the advertiser, and I'm the seller, I'm the publisher, I own the media, we're going to do a deal. Is our deal going to be based on cost per impressions? So my job as a publisher is to serve your ads 1 million times. It's not my job to get clicks, strictly speaking. It's not my job to win airline ticket sales or hotel bookings, okay? On the other hand, maybe our deal isn't cost per impressions, which by the way is called CPM, Roman numeral M, cost per 1,000 impressions. That's how it's sold. And that's the least risk for me and the most risk for you. Cost per click, pay per click, they're synonymous. You'll only pay me when my audience clicks on your ads. So there's a little more risk on my part. Okay, a little less risk on your end because you're only paying for people clicking on the ads. And so some of the risk that I'm assuming is that the ad creative that you provide me, right, the messaging and the graphical creativity in the ad that you design as the advertiser, I'm assuming some risk that it's going to get a response from my audience. Sometimes a publisher that does a CPC deal, a PPC deal, requires that they influence the design of the creative.
What I'm talking about is, for example, in the library, people are probably unaware of this, but for electronic books, we pay per use, whereas for electronic articles, we have a subscription model. So we pay a flat rate based on an assumption of a certain amount of use. So I'm just looking at the parallels there, and I'm wondering if the pay-per-click takes over in our realm, it's going to really change the business model of the library.
Right. So in your characterization of pay-per-click, which I'm sure is the industry phrase for it, I'm thinking of it as like a pay-per-view the article. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah, the internet's created this microeconomic model where folks want to pay for one song in the iTunes store.
So I guess it goes obviously to the consumer. Consumer is quicker than it's going to go in the library, and we're going to end up with the micro payments. You'll be able to pay for a click of a article within now something you have to have a subscription to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a fascinating phenomenon that's broader even than the library example. That's right. That's right. There are newspapers and magazines. These are packaged products historically, just like in the music industry, albums were typically sold. iTunes came along and broke that model, right? It's very hard for a musician today to have what was once called a gold record, right? Because I think there's still value in packaging, though, based on an empirical assessment as opposed to my own history in the industry. So I would speculate that packaging has value, but the pricing around packaging versus pay per is going to have to coexist in a harmonious way, and one will affect the other, no doubt. Because it in many ways goes back to the risk equation. The seller and the buyer having an option and deciding, packaging is better because I'm going to be a loyal reader and it's over time cheaper for me to subscribe. But it's a great question.
I have to comment that it's the last session of a long day and you're all riveted. So I think that reflects on him.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So this wraps up this year's business conference from the School of Management. I'd like to, again, have you all give Elaine and Lilia a round of applause for all their hard work. A round of applause for all of our faculty who've been here supporting us, students, IT team, with which we can't live without. Also, this evening, we have a networking event in Eberhard Hall. The information and the room number is in your program. And also a save the date because the EMBA program, rather the EMBA steering committee, the alumni group that is former students from the EMBA, will be having an event on the 11th of December, so save the date, and we'll be broadcasting more information about the event, any speakers that we might have, where the venue will be. That's an alumni event that you're all invited to, so we hope to see you there. Again, an applause for this wonderful conference today. Thank you. Have a safe time getting home.